Pandemic Studios was formed in 1998 by game developers Andrew Goldman and Josh Resnick, who had ambitions to have their own studio, compiling the team of developers who made Battlezone and Dark Reign for Activision. The name Pandemic was decided because they wanted something catchy and that would stand the test of time. It was narrowed down to Seismic and Pandemic, but Seismic was already taken, so they went with Pandemic. And the rest is history, with the name and logo setting the tone for the type of games that would develop over the next decade. And former employers Activision provided equity investment for this new studio. In return, they developed sequels for Battlezone and Dark Reign, a very good way to settle into the market with their own studio. Though initially on a 5-game deal with Activision, from that point Pandemic continued to expand their scope. In 2001, they set up a second development studio in Brisbane, Australia, and were setting a name for themselves for other publishers in multiple genres, including Army Men RTS, FirstPlays 2002, Full Spectrum Warrior, and Star Wars The Clone Wars, Battlefront, and Battlefront 2. The latter, along with Knights of the Old Republic, as my favorite Star Wars game. And 2005 was their best and busiest year, developing 3 solid titles: Battlefront 2, Destroy All Humans, and Mercenaries Playground of Destruction. Now this game was first confirmed by Pandemic on February 2004. Before going with a war setting at all, the core idea they wanted was a map where every single thing on it can be used and destroyed. Literally every single thing. Buildings no matter what size, tanks that can shoot rockets, every weapon can be used, an ambitious taking to say the least. And as they got deeper into development, they realized there was a better concept that based more closely to home. During pre-production, the US Army were hunting down Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, and the development team thought, why not make a deck of 52 cards of wanted targets from the army? Which was also based on the US Army's idea to help troops identify the most wanted targets of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Combined with the concept of being able to blow up any building, what if you were hunting down these high-value targets that had escaped huge military forces from many different countries, they asked themselves, and set the map at a part of the world that hadn't been explored up to that point. They essentially found their biggest inspirations from reading and watching the news on TV every day. And then they asked themselves who was going to be the main protagonist. Upon further research, they came across private military corporations, which meant gameplay-wise gave the player more freedom since they didn't have to answer to a specific army, and you're allowed to work for multiple factions in this battle zone since all mercenaries care about is money, as well as having a plausible know-how to use all the weapons on the map, so this also had a huge influence on how the rest of the gameplay operated. Mercenaries Playground of Destruction was released for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox on January 2005, and was briefly banned in South Korea because of its obvious subject matter, though it was lifted a couple of years later. Honestly, just saying North Korea is enough to risk demonetizing a video on YouTube these days. But Mercenaries Playground of Destruction is a game I've wanted to review for a very long time, thanks to years of requests from you guys, and given how many other shooters I reviewed from the mid-2000s with the color turned off like Killzone and Black. But being open world looked more compelling, more complex, and being developed by Pandemic Studios and put countless hours into Star Wars Battlefront 2 back in the day and played the demo of Destroy All Humans before the full game was released. So, an open world shooter set in North Korea sounds perfect. This is one of many games I got during my road trip along the east coast of Australia, picking this up at a retro game store at the Gold Coast. The Xbox version specifically, since it's backwards compatible on the Xbox Series X. I'm very surprised there's no PC port of Mercenaries, but that's okay considering how it looks on this console. I love how sharp that game's textures look, running at 60 frames per second and using an Xbox One Elite controller to play it. This is the closest thing you can get to a HD remaster.
I think I know which way the board will go, but I have one more question. We're basically relying on a single agent here. Do you have someone in mind?
Yes, I do. I believe I have the perfect candidate.
Set a few years into the future in an alternate timeline where North Korea President Choi Kim is in the process of turning his country into a democracy. His son General Choi Song takes exception and starts a coup to overthrow the government, taking over the country himself, completely isolating it, and when the Australian Navy discover a shipment of nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula en route to terrorists, the Allied nations invade North Korea and try to stop General Song, putting bounties on all the highest ranking businessmen, officers, weapons scientists, and generals presented on a deck of 52 cards, with Choi Song being the ace of spades with a $100 million bounty on his head. Meanwhile, other countries get involved in the conflict with their own agenda. China wanting North Korea as part of their province, South Korea who want a fully unified nation, and the Russian mafia looking to profit as much as they can on the conflict, selling all kinds of weapons, kind of like the Mercenaries. So while things are initially friendly between each other, they begin to put their own agenda ahead of everything else, even if it means ticking off more than just the North Korean army.
You know they say the DMZ is the most dangerous place on Earth.
I know.
But still, $100 million. You think you could spend that much money in one lifetime?
You know me. I've got expensive tastes.
So, who are you? As the title suggests, you play as a mercenary who isn't on anyone's side but thrown into the deep end of the DMZ doing whatever it takes to clear the Deck of 52 without any barriers or procedures holding them back.
Oh. Hey, Merc. Glad you could make it. We're ready to clear you for your first ACE contract. Try to keep the casualties down, if you can.
You have a choice of 3 different mercenaries, including Chris Jacobs, former US soldier who can take the most amount of damage, Matthias Nilsson, former Swedish Navy officer who can run the fastest, but the one I picked for this playthrough is Jennifer Mui, a British-Chinese spy less likely to be spotted in disguise, and she's voiced by Jennifer Hale, one of my favorite voice actors.
Oh, it's hard to take a man named Chin Chang seriously, but I'll give it a shot.
That's not to say the other voice actors in this game are certainly talented themselves.
I sure as hell don't mind the opportunity to get something done around here without wading through a sea of red tape. I may rely on you in the future. How's that sound?
As long as the pay's good, I'm perfectly willing to jump in.
Okay.
I would have thought with multiple characters to choose from, the gameplay time would be short, especially after exploring almost the whole map after an hour of gameplay. But who you select depends on their abilities and the language each one can understand from a certain faction. Jennifer, for example, being half Chinese, can understand that faction's language, so you get a better idea of what their motivations are behind their back. There's not a lot of character or story development with these mercenaries or leaders you meet with before starting a mission, nothing deep. And as you capture targets from the Deck of 52, there's not much progression other than being more difficult to get to them. Partly thanks to how open-ended the choices are, so trying to come up with branching storylines, you'll find yourself with dozens of theoretical multiple endings. Instead, the story is better set to enhance the strengths of the open world genre without needing to rampage like a GTA title to make it fun. All you need to provide is a setting and then choose whoever you want to work with the North Korean army being the only consistently hostile enemy. It's the amount of choice you're given that feels so high for an open world game. Which factions to be close with, the approach to missions, how they feel about other ones on the map. It's enough to encourage you to come up with your own interpretation, at least wondering if one is going to go against the other.
Kill anyone who betrays my trust. You got a problem with that? You got a problem working for a killer, huh? Answer me.
The goal as a mercenary really is to play all sides in order to get that intel for these targets and earn the highest amount of money for the best weapons to make said jobs easier.
Hope you like the money we've been paying you, because I got a ton more where that came from.
Oh, and also preventing nuclear war. After all, what's the point of all that money earned if the world looks like something out of Fallout? The perfect anti-hero story.
You actually get to do something heroic this time out.
Heroism's overrated. Money, however, is still great.
The open world genre around this time was in peak demand thanks to Grand Theft Auto, with other franchises being, or at least followed a similar format, including Jak and Daxter, Mafia, Saints Row, Gun, and Crackdown to name a few. But what made Mercenaries stand out back then was not sitting itself in an urban city, but a worn-torn, secretive part of the world that would be more likely reserved for a standard linear third-person or first-person shooter. Given how notoriously closed, secretive, and strict North Korea is, it was a huge challenge for the artists to recreate it into video game form. While they had plenty of resources of Pyongyang and the DMZ to work with, including the Arc of Triumph and a finished version of the Ryugyong Hotel before the exterior part of it anyway was completed in real life, the rest of it was minimal to say the least, especially back when you can't just search North Korea on Google, so they took inspiration from other countries nearby, including China, South Korea, and Japan. Pandemic claims the map is 26,000 square kilometers, and when you look at it in the menu, it does look like outskirts with cities just plopped all over the place, with the DMZ on the bottom right and Pyongyang north on the map. It's split between 4 main points of interest, with each faction having their own little base to start the missions with. And after you reach the halfway point, you unlock the north province on the border of the city of Dandong, China, so you combine both provinces together. It is a big map, and when you drive around it, elevations, for example, are out of whack, a lot of steep hills, feels. It feels more video game than realistic. Yeah, no kidding. But otherwise, the tone, the music, the setting, the way it looks, feels more like it should belong in Spec Ops: The Line if it was set in North Korea, or an 80s war film like Platoon or Full Metal Jacket. It looks and feels desolate, the colors, especially when it changes based on what part of the map you're on. The soundtrack was composed by Michael Giacchino, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is mostly known for Disney films and war video games like Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, and the theme of Black. And you have great music in Mercenaries. Each faction you fight with in a mission have their own theme, which sounds like it fits with the country they're representing. However, the number of different tracks is small, which make it sound repetitive. Because apart from the specialty ones where you're trying to capture an ace from the deck of 52, get their own music, when you're free roaming or getting into the line of fire, they have their own themes, and that's about it. Because you're doing that a lot, you're hearing the same music way too many times. And I don't know if it's a glitch playing this on the Series X, but I don't like that it plays the theme every single time you pause the game. It got to a point where I mute the TV every time I pause it because I got sick of hearing it after a while.
I wonder if we can get the South Koreans to pay us to make it secure again.
The sound team went to Travis Air Force Base to record all the gunshots and military sounds, as it was all in a soundproof hangar to help troops learn what these noises and sirens were and how to fix it. So the developers were allowed to use them for the game, which is pretty cool. It's also worth noting Pandemic Studios had worked very closely with the US Army previously to develop Full Spectrum Warrior, which is considered one of the most realistic military tactical games in terms of awareness needed to play it properly, and was developed primarily to help soldiers understand the correct methods and tactics needed to survive on the battlefield. So Pandemic know a bit how militaries work. They're kind of a funny fact knowing they can make an army game so focused on tactics, and then develop another one that tries to be as over the top as possible. And technically, looking at it, it's not exactly the most stunning 6th gen title, but it's a good example of gameplay more than making up for it, with the way things explode, the vast variety of supplies, and the way faction friendliness and hostility is set up. At least it proves the attention to detail is there, and there's more on this dark, depressing war zone than appears on the surface. The shooting mechanics and the way characters move feel very similar to Star Wars Battlefront. Because Pandemic were developing so many titles with large maps in such a short amount of time, using the same Zero engine to run it, Battlefront, Mercenaries, and later Destroy All Humans, they all feel very similar to play. And that lightweight style combined with the high volume of weapons, supplies, and tactics at your disposal, it certainly lives up to its title, Playground of Destruction. Contrary to the way it looks and sounds, the actual gameplay is very explosive and over the top, like a kid playing with toy cars and crashing them into each other like army men. The vehicle controls are very simple on the ground, albeit without any suspension. Even in the air, it's a lot easier to comprehend than Grand Theft Auto, and almost everything can be driven and hijacked, even in mid-air. Known officially as action hijacking, and that really impressed me. It's quite a sight with all the random battles that appear as you're driving from one spot to another. You're just bulldozing through them all like it's nothing more than a domestic disturbance. As I mentioned before, the primary goal above all else is to capture the deck of 52 scattered all over the map. The owner will give you a rough idea where a target might be located, or if you just happen to be nearby on the map by accident.
There's a number card nearby. Check your radar for the location.
It's impressive how they were able to fit all 52 targets in a different location on a map that's not exactly huge. Yes, you're only taking on one suit at a time, but even then, the map design is clearly designed in a way that by the time you've got the ace of spades, you've explored every possible inch on this map. Capturing a target gives you the maximum bounty and intel on the ace target, which have their own little map just for these missions, and killing them only gives you half of it, since allied forces can't get intel on them. Obviously. With each card getting progressively harder to obtain. It might be easy to start with given how bulletproof your mercenary is, even playing as Jennifer, but at some point with tanks and rockets blocking your path, you'll receive a rude awakening. And that's where the mission markers, like you'd expect from Grand Theft Auto, come into play, working for either the Allied forces, South Koreans, Chinese, and Russian mafia. And they vary from saving people, blowing something up, and even capturing a higher level target from the deck of 52 that isn't an ace, but are otherwise optional to unlock supplies, weapons, and vehicles which can be accessed through the dark web at almost any time.
Look at that.
And as I mentioned about the story, because all the factions start to think more about themselves and go after each other as well as the North Korean army, as a mercenary, you're not essentially taking any sides, but their money and supplies.
First the Chinese, now the South Koreans. The Russians aren't out to make friends.
Sometimes you have to break a few eggs.
So there will be missions where you need to go against another faction. One moment you'll be working with the South Koreans, next thing you're attacking them because the Chinese ordered you to. Theoretically, you can get every single faction hostile towards you if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Though there are a lot of different ways to get their friendliness back, like finding intel scattered all over the map and killing North Korean soldiers in their presence. It's not as easy as it looks, since they're always trying to gun you down the second they see you. That is until I discovered you can just go to the mission marker and bribe the officer outside the headquarters to make the faction no longer hostile towards you.
Though my aides tell me I should have you killed for your careless actions against my men, it seems I must depend on you one last time.
Other hostile acts include killing civilians and allied forces, even if you do it silently will cost you a lot of money. Honestly, most of them deserve it anyway, because when the pressure got high, they either got stuck or just refused to follow me when saving them was the main objective. Basically, the friendly AI can be really incompetent at the worst possible time. The reality is you need to rustle everyone's feathers if you're trying to capture every single bounty from the deck of 52. You know what they say, money talks. But if you can, some have the option to do it silently as possible or just avoid attacking their soldiers so you can avoid losing their friendliness levels. It's a brilliant gameplay trope that makes you think twice about your approach. There's always a, oh, you can do it this way instead, but without explicitly telling you. It's how you see the situation and you need to work it out yourself. There's no such thing as cheesing your way to a certain target, particularly if there's usually something to kill you instantly nearby. For example, while it might look like you can just fly straight to the main objective, you'll be welcomed with anti-aircraft missiles. That's what makes Mercenaries so hard. The enemies with rockets and tanks that, while give the game's title validity, to say they can kill you instantly or more specifically reduce your health to 1 is no exaggeration. And because there are no checkpoints on these missions, if you fail no matter how close you are to the finish, like you could get to the point of having a target from the deck of 52 in your sights, you do it all over again.
There's a medic when you need one.
It can feel incredibly brutal at times, and with the vast supply of weapons and airstrikes at your disposal, it can take a while to get your head around how all of them work, especially given how expensive a lot of what's available is, and how easy it is to lose it from either bad aim or bad timing as enemies nearby can shoot a supply chopper, for example. Even bribing the faction and make them no longer hostile towards you costs a huge amount of money. But on the flip side, scenarios like this are part of what make the map feel alive. Compared to a situation like Grand Theft Auto during a very high wanted level, Mercenaries feels more complex, like enemy choppers trying to dodge your rocket, the random battles as you're driving around the map, factions shooting at you because you're driving a North Korean vehicle. Your mind is constantly in survival mode and you eventually use it to your advantage.
Now, I don't need to tell you why I'm not waiting for authorization. You get your ass out there and stop General Chang. If you find Song, you know what to do.
One of my favorite moments, for example, was capturing the Ace of Diamonds. First, I had to take down his super weapon. I was able to disguise myself as North Korean, dodge this large wave of enemies, deal with everyone just at the top of the mountain, destroy that super weapon of his, went back down again in disguise, and saved all the free airstrikes provided at the beginning of the mission, and used it all to take down the tanks and reinforcements in one go to capture the Ace of Diamonds alive. Make sense? Because all of that took over half an hour without checkpoints, so I could have easily lost it near the end after a rocket to the face and have to do the entire thing all over again.
Great work, you've verified the Ace of Diamonds. The Allies are wiring the bounty to us now.
That perfectly sums up how hard this game is, yet how exciting it is when all the stars align. Point being, it can be very challenging at times, which forces you to take unorthodox methods based on how lightweight the gameplay feels. It's actually fun to do that. The levels and situations are designed in a way that there's a potential counter to every approach, which make the map a lot more in-depth than what you see when driving through these uneven elevations. And you need to think about the strengths of the mercenary you selected at the start. Jennifer, for example, depends on stealth and is less likely to be spotted in disguise. It might not sound as exciting as blasting your way through, but it was just as fun to do.
$100 million in the bag.
Yeah, not too bad for a day's work.
So overall, the difficulty comes down to the ally levels, the amount of money you have, and spending wisely, as it's easy to waste it on a poorly positioned strike or drop off because an enemy can shoot it down, and a little bit of luck to dodge those enemy rockets and tanks. But that's just part of it, deciding when to spend your money, figuring out the enemy placement through trial and error, because the game never recommends a certain way. Mercenaries feels like a lot of random gameplay elements being tied together with sticky tape on maps where everything is made of cardboard and acrylic sheets. And yet, it works. It all blends together in a way that is unique for the open world genre, and fun and challenging at the same time. When you capture that target alive, either through efficiency or from dodging all the firepower single-handedly, it's unbelievably satisfying. Honestly, had I known it'd be this hard, I might not have reviewed it, but I was already halfway through the story when I discovered that fact, so I certainly wasn't going to give up by that point. I'm really glad I didn't. When it comes to gameplay, setting, variety, and your actions genuinely affecting a lot of these things throughout the story, whether it be making it more difficult or how much you earn and the risks in spending that money, make for an incredibly rewarding experience. I really like this game. It's brilliant. There's just so much going for it. It's aged better than a lot of open world titles from that generation, and demonstrated what else could be done with the genre, paving the way for games like Just Cause. A 100% recommendation, especially as you can still get it for a decent price despite being released late in the generation's life cycle. After a very successful 2005 for Pandemic Studios, they were bought out by Elevation Partners for $300 million along with BioWare, and they merged together to form a super studio, though still technically keeping their brands and identities, which turned out to be a good investment because a couple of years later, Electronic Arts came calling and bought the two together for $860 million. Unfortunately, as we know now in hindsight, that was the beginning of the end for Pandemic, as they dissolved just a couple of years later with many promising projects left to rot. But they did leave us with a follow-up to Mercenaries, and considering how much I love this game, I am a little curious to know what World in Flames is like as well, though this logo doesn't fill me with too much hope.
But sadly, for the people of North Korea, the fallout from this crisis will continue for years to come. This is Adriana Livingston reporting live for GSRN.
Are we back?
Thanks everyone on Patreon, including Anthony Cossins, Bibbs, Brittleback, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, Emmanuel Figueroa, Eric Barboza, Atmosphere, Indie DM, Ellen Craft, Nightkid Gaming, Peter GT, Roman Artemanov, Ruben Pekog, Sam Sneed, Tickford45, Thomas Rosendale, Will Stokes, and as well as everyone for watching this review. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, everyone. Bring on 2025. Spenny out.